So, good afternoon for the fourth of our seminar sessions. Hope you're all well. Today, converting existing data to S1000D. And this, I guess, kind of rounds off, we've looked at why to do S1000D. We've looked at some of the authoring tools. We've looked at some of the management and publishing tools. And of course, the last thing that we need to do is actually get some data into S1000D that we can then use all those tools on. So again, we're going to take about an hour today plus question time, and we will have a think about some of the following topics. Kind of, where is our data going to come from? What options do we have for conversion? Rekeying, cut and paste, electronic maybe. What can you do to help in terms of your data in the first place? We'll have a little think about adding value during conversion, and I'll talk obviously at the time more about what I mean by adding value. Have a little think about illustrations and other media types. Little question there kind of towards the end, is conversion a one-way street, and what do I mean by that, and what are the implications if we have gone down this conversion route? And then we'll actually have a look at a little bit of electronic processing. We've got a conversion tool here. I'll show you a little bit of that and how it works and how that might be able to help. Certainly do some bulk data conversion, and that's one of the key things that we'll kind of be assessing during the afternoon is what are the best tools and when and why. So always start with a question: what and why, or the other way around, why and what do you want to convert? So the whys, first of all, it may be that you are supplying your existing components to a new project, and therefore that new project has asked you to provide the accompanying documentation as S1000D. That's one of the ones that we see an awful lot of, particularly a lot of kind of tier 2, tier 3 manufacturers supplying to a prime project, and they want that data in S1000D. It might be also that you're looking to upgrade a project. And there are things that you can do with your data, particularly if we're talking big data. If you've got complex projects that have evolved over a long period of time and you've got a long history of data, then actually there are things that S1000D can do that can really help you manage your data, both in the management aspect with things like the CSDBs and stuff that we saw last week, publishing in different formats, publishing different versions of the data depending on the customer and the product configuration and so on. And so there might actually be commercial drivers to move to something like S1000D rather than staying in a kind of traditional non-structured TechPubs environment. And then there's the kind of things, what do we want to convert? Well, if we're talking existing publications, then they come from all sorts of different formats and different backgrounds. So we have our kind of traditional word processing background like Word or InDesign or unstructured FrameMaker, or if it's really old, even PageMaker that was the runner to InDesign and so on. What we typically find with these kind of publications is that they look great because you've had tech authors that have spent years poring over them, adjusting the margins, adjusting the tab spaces, adjusting the leading on the lines of text so that it exactly fits nicely on pages and it looks like a really good publication. But underneath all of that, generally, is very little consistency in how it's been put together to make it look nice. InDesign is a classic one where your blocks of text are in stories, and these stories can run all over the place, and sometimes they're linked and sometimes they're not linked. And so when you start trying to extract things from something like InDesign, you can end up with all these little snippets of text that don't relate to each other properly or don't come out in the right order. This gets even worse when we see things with, for example, parallel columns, and depending on your source format, then it might be that it reads straight across the parallel column. And so you end up with this kind of mix of both sides all at once. It might be that it reads down the column, but it then includes the header and footer before reading the next column and so on. You notice I don't mention PDF as a good source there, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. It might be that you already have a structured source You might be in FrameMaker with a bespoke set of DTDs or schemas. It might be something similar in Arbortext. We see quite a few tech pubs house that over the years have tried to do these things themselves. They see the benefit of structured information, but now they have to be standards compliant. And so they want to get into S1000D from some form of SGML or XML. And that's very similar in customers that we have come in that they already do stuff maybe in iSpec 2200, or they've been working to a mil spec, or maybe they've even got stuff in DITA. And again, often if it's DITA, it's some kind of proprietary standard or in-house standard. All of those are partway there. We can do a lot more from a structured starting point than we can from an unstructured starting point. But all of these have pluses and minuses when we come to trying to convert them into S1000D. And then, of course, there's all the figures and all the media. And often what we find is in our Word or our InDesign documents is those figures have maybe been pasted from a source graphic, or maybe there was a source graphic out there somewhere, but it's been lost. So in effect, the master is the one that's in the Word document. We see cases all the time where the figure is actually composite. So it may be that there was an underlying picture that was pasted in, but then all the annotations and callouts have been added using the drawing tools in the particular word processing package. And we've even got one we're looking at the moment for a customer where they have some really nice source CGM graphics. They've been made straight out of the CATIA, which is a 3D modeling software source. So the graphics are great. But what they've then done is they put them into InDesign. They put 2 or 3 graphics together. So, for example, you might have your location image in the corner, then you've got the main image, and then you've got all the call outs. So maybe the arrows showing perhaps movement or adjustment. And all of that has been built up in InDesign. So if you try and export that, it's not a graphic, it's a whole series of elements. Do you screenshot it? You can do, but then you end up with a raster image rather than a vector image, and so on. So again, there's still pitfalls to think of. And if we're talking embedded media, obviously you're not going to get something generally like a video or a 3D model in a basic word publishing, a word processor, but it might be that you've come from a mil spec where they do have those things and you need to transfer them across. So what options does that give us? Well, we can simply rekey the data, literally sit there at our keyboard, have one page open, or it might even be the book on the table, and type it into our new structure. And slightly better than that, but not much better than that, is maybe copying and pasting the data, where at least we're doing kind of an electronic copy of blocks at a time. So we might be able to pick up a whole paragraph and copy it across. It's really simple. We can start quite quickly. We are still going to need to create the target data structures. So we're going to have to create in S1000D at least the data module framework. We're going to need to have already decided our numbering system, and we're going to have to decide on our data module codification. So when we look at our original source document, one of the first jobs is to work out how we're going to break that down, particularly if it's a whole publication. If we've never modularized it in the past, we need to start thinking straight away, how is this going to end up in data modules? What's my SNS going to be? What's my information codes going to be? And these are all the things, obviously, that we've covered over the last couple of weeks when we've talked about S1000D. So once we've got those data structures, we can start pasting, or we can start rekeying. Paragraphs, if we've got nice long paragraphs, that's quite an easy copy and paste. But when we get into things like tables or lists, because of the structure requirements of S1000D, you're still down to perhaps only copying and pasting a few words or a line of text at a time. The other option is that we copy and paste big blocks of text, maybe into something like FrameMaker, which will handle raw text coming in. And then we have to start wrapping up that text into the elements. So again, the example is like a table or a list. You're going to have to wrap the text into a paragraph, and then into its list item, and then into its overall parent random list, and then put that parent random list or sequential list into the body paragraph. All of that is labor intensive, and it's prone to mistake. Have we missed a bit of text? Have we copied and pasted something twice? Have we rekeyed something and we've mistyped? And particularly values. If we're talking aircraft, military vehicles, civilian aviation, some of the values that come across are absolutely critical. Have we mistyped a temperature? Have we mistyped a G rating, a loading? Have we put a plus in instead of a minus? Have we put a degree symbol in instead of a percent sign? And so on and so on. What can we do? We could outsource it. And whenever we convert, there are opportunities. There's opportunities to improve our data quality. And there's opportunities to what I mentioned right at the beginning, this value added tagging. But I will come on more about that in a minute. Doing additional tagging is great. It does add value to our content, but again, it's manually intensive if we're going down this rekey, copy and paste data route. And so always this comes back to time and cost available, and even time itself from a business perspective is a cost. So are we going to do the value added tagging on a manual basis, or actually is it going to cost too much because of the extra time incurred? And so we're not going to do that. So what other option is there? Well, some form of electronic conversion. So again, we need to define what our target structures are, but this time round, we don't necessarily need to create those. So I don't necessarily need to have a basic data module that I'm going to be pasting content into. It may be that my electronic conversion can create that as part of the process. What it is going to do is it's going to require extensive analysis of the source content. We need to understand how the document's been written. Do we have that source content, or are we looking at something like a PDF output? And we're probably not going to be able to do this in a single pass. So there's going to be a complex set of processes that takes the source, does some processing, then maybe it does some tagging, then maybe it does some more processing, then it's going to come up with some kind of output. And I've said there, we will almost certainly require manual intervention. There will always be bits because we're coming from a manually generated environment in the first place. Therefore, there will be inconsistencies to an electronic standard. And so however we work our way through, we're going to need that bit of manual intervention to give the electronic conversion a steer. On the flip side, this could be provided as an in-house tool set. You're going to need still that extensive piece of consultancy and external partner developing the code to build this as a tool set in the first place. And they're still going to need to look at the data and understand how the data is structured to set that tool set up. But once all of that consultancy and all of that engineering work is done, the development work, then potentially you're at a place where you could have a turnkey in-house tool set that you can feed a document in one end, do the manual support bit in the middle with the aid of the tool, and then at the other end, you have some S1000D. It's obviously less prone to mistakes because we are taking electronic chunks of text, and other than the fact that we're maybe wrapping them up in tags, then we're not actually changing the underlying text. That doesn't get away from the fact that we need to check that there's been no mistakes, but I'll talk more about that in a little while. But we're less likely to make human errors in rekeying information. And because it's electronic, we can deal with huge volumes. And like I say, we don't have to necessarily convert everything all in one go. We could feed in a document and get some data modules out, and then feed in another document and get some more data modules out. We can still do that data improvement bit. Any time that we're converting should be a time that we're looking at the quality of our data. We're looking for mistakes that have maybe been baked in for years, that because it's in an unfriendly format, shall we say, and not easy to rectify and correct. Well, now's the chance. If we're doing such a big change of format, now's the time to look through and do those data improvements and do this value-added tagging automation. Do the value-added tagging. But the difference is with the electronic conversion is potentially we can automate some of that process. So whatever you choose, and I've put it 3 times, I was going to sit here and say data security, data security, data security. You have got to make sure that what goes in, by the time it comes out the other end, is still fit for purpose. And notice that I don't say that what goes in comes out the other end the same, because that may not be the case, but it has to come out and still be safe and still be fit for purpose. So whatever you're doing, whether it is just a complete rekey with a whole army of typists, and I don't recommend the infinite monkey pool of typists, but probably a few trained ones, or you're using a full electronic comparison, then you still need to make sure that the final output is fit for purpose. So it might be that you have a way of electronically comparing what went in to what has now come out. And, you know, we're not talking looking at the layout, because we don't expect the layout and so on to be the same, but the critical content must be the same. Otherwise, if we can't do that, then we have to have a process of completely revalidating this new output. And that might mean that it has to go back to the engineers or the customer for them to agree that the output is still fit for purpose before we actually publish it to the users. And that's a big consideration, not so much in the time taken to do the conversion, but you need that amount of time allowed in your process. If you've got a deadline that this is going to be converted by a certain date, allow time in it for that revalidation and possibly rework. So how do we choose? You know, how do we say, yes, let's rekey it, let's cut and paste it, let's have somebody come in and help us produce an electronic conversion package? And it's too many factors for me to sit and say, oh, you should do this or you should do that. You know, how much source data have we got? If we're talking a single manual in the tens of pages, I'm leaning straight away to saying, well, actually, you know what, it's probably just as quick to cut and paste, because then we haven't got to spend all this time doing the data analysis. We can work out as we cut and paste what structures we're going from and what structures we're going to in the S1000D. As we work through the document, we can be creating those new data modules for the next section and the next section and the next section. On the flip side, if we've got a lot of data, you know, we absolutely want to go down the electronic route, because otherwise we do need that whole infinite monkey typing pool. The quality and consistency of the source, however, plays a massive impact on how effective that electronic conversion is going to be, how easy it is to set up it in the first place, and how much manual intervention you're going to need, either in pre-preparing some of the data before it goes into electronic processing, or during the process itself of perhaps retagging, re-identifying elements of the data. And so that knocks on to the next couple of points there on the screen. The time and skill available, either in or out of house. You know, are we going to try and do this ourselves? If we've never worked in structure before, do we need to get some training before we start working in structure? Do we need to get trained on S1000D and then we start doing our cut and paste? Or actually, do we hand it all to an out-of-house service? We let them convert the whole lot for us and give it back to us in S1000D ready to go. And again, time, budget, and the availability of those skills in or out of house will all play a part in which of these options you go down. And even in the first place, what was the business drive to want to convert? If we're being told we've got to do this because we're supplying a component for a project that has to be in 1000D, well, it might be just as quick, depending on the complexity of the component, to rekey that data or start from scratch with new data. But 9 times out of 10, particularly in this kind of industry, our data is extensive and complex. And so we probably want to try and find, if we can, some form of electronic conversion, even if it's a kind of a partly manual, partly assisted electronic conversion. Bottom line, small project on a tight budget, yeah, rekey and paste. Up to large and complex, multiple projects with multiple publications, electronic. But my kind of dotted line in the middle there is I cannot tell you what that changeover point is. There is no magic number that says if I've got this many pages or this much time, I'm going to rekey it, up to I've got this many pages, I've got to go electronic. These are business decisions that you need to sit and look at and get some, qualified help in to help you look at it. So companies that do conversion, companies that have got consulting experience in looking at and understanding and evaluating your data, so that they can say, okay, yeah, you've got a lot of it, but actually the data is in such poor order that electronic is not going to be possible, or electronic's going to be really hard. That's going to push you towards perhaps a rekeying service or a copy and paste service. Even if you outsource that might still be the best option. Can we simplify the process? And again, we're looking at simplifying it for a couple of reasons. One is for our in-house benefit. So yeah, only change small parts at a time. So if we've only been asked to provide S1000D for a specific component, well, let's just concentrate on that component. That gives us time to adapt our own business processes. We can learn and adjust to the new tool sets that we're going to use for S1000D. And so if we start off with a small project, we can model that, we can look at the best way, we can even try potentially different approaches to our conversion. And then once we've done and been through that process, we can sit back and we can analyze the results, and we can then decide how we scale that up for future work. The other side to simplifying is looking at your source data even before you convert. And aside from King Charles, consistency is king. And that is both of, when I say styles, I'm talking about the actual text on the page. Have we got consistent formats for our headings, for our warnings and cautions, for our notes, for our bullet points, for our indents, for our different levels of para and subpara. And then there's the overall layout. Is stuff consistent on the page? Are tables consistent with their headers and their footers and their follow-ons? Are our figures and graphics consistently laid out on the page? Is the overall page structure consistent, or do we jump around between one column, two column, many column? The more consistent the source data is, the more easily we're going to be able to do some kind of electronic conversion if we want to. And it may be that spending a amount of time making your data more consistent before you consider converting it is actually time and money well spent. Coming back to our friend, the PDF, we spoke to a customer just yesterday, and they have PDF documentation and they need to edit it. And I think their situation is they're taking ownership of the product, but they don't have ownership of the source data for the documentation. They only have the PDFs. And you're right, it's almost impossible to edit a PDF. You can change the odd element on a line. You can occasionally get away with adding a line, but as soon as you change, whole paragraphs or try and replace figures, then you've got page ripple going on, your page numbering's all over the place. Yeah, PDF is not designed for editing. And the problem is that if you try and convert that back to something like Word, and then work from Word, again, all those inherent PDF issues come into that Word document. So your columns break down, your headers and footers break down. You get weird things going on. If, for example, you've got a figure in the middle of a page in a multi-column layout, Word doesn't know whether to run the columns above the figure and then below the figure, or all the way down one side and then all the way down the other side, and so on. And scanned documents are even worse. If you've got a scanned document, okay, you will possibly have the electronic text captured. And again, it depends on how good the original print was as to whether it's been scanned and OCR'd and so on. If you can get back to an original Word document, an InDesign document, or if it was in some kind of XML format, SGML format, that is your best source data. And finally, on graphics, again, Ideally, you want source graphics that are in some kind of vector image, because if we're talking S1000D, we're talking screen readers by and large, rather than paper publications or PDF publications. And so we want graphics that will display well, that will scale well, and that don't take up a huge amount of storage space. High-res scans look nice, but they are massive to store and transmit across the network if we need to. If the only source of graphics is what's currently embedded in your application, then again, it will be a business decision based on cost and time, but is it going to be of value to even reproduce the graphics from scratch? Get in an Illustrator, give them the source, get them to use, and there are tracing tools that will help turn existing illustrations into vector-based that then just need cleaning up. But the graphics are just as important as the text. One quick word about FrameMaker. We've had quite a lot of customers. We've been an Adobe partner for years, and so we get customers coming to us both about their S1000D and about their FrameMaker and so on. Working in unstructured FrameMaker does not give you some magical pathway to suddenly get to structured FrameMaker. So we get customers coming along saying, oh, yeah, we're thinking of doing S1000D. What we're going to do, we're going to start working in unstructured FrameMaker so that our authors are used to FrameMaker, and then we're going to convert to S1000D. And we're like, no, please don't. Working in unstructured frame, you might as well carry on working in Word or InDesign or whatever you were in before, because there's no additional benefit. You don't become familiar with FrameMaker, because working in unstructured frame, you still need all the things like the paragraph designer and the page designer and the formatting and the table manager and all those bits. When you work in structured frame using S1000D, you don't care about the format. You're just worrying about the content in its correct structure. So the two are completely different. Frame unstructured to S1000D is not a halfway house. All you're doing is spending time and effort going to FrameMaker and then spending that same time and effort again to go to structured. Right. Not a rant, but certainly a good learning point that we've seen over the years. So what about value add? I've talked a lot of stuff at the moment about how things are going to cost and some of the downsides. What about some of the upsides? The beauty, of course, of XML is that everything is tagged. And so, aside from the stuff that we've looked at with publishing and authoring over the last couple of weeks, where we're talking about the format being agnostic to the underlying content, well, we can also tag for automation. So we can tag our content for history and change, and we can have reasons for update in the ID and status, and we can have stuff tagged that's been changed in the content. And we can then use that to automatically generate to the user when we're building publications what has changed in their publication. Likewise with applicability, if we have our components or our product or our platform, whatever it happens to be, and we have different potential versions for different customers or different markets, then applicability is absolutely brilliant, because we no longer have to keep 6 different copies of a Word document with all the different versions and try and maintain all of those in parallel. We break it down to data module level, and we'll find that only some of our data modules will have differences for the different builds or fits. And it might even be that at publication level, we just drop in and drop out different data modules with our different component fits. And applicability will do all of that for us. And so we can tag some of that up as we build our conversion platform, and we can then move forward with S1000D using that applicability. And then the other kinds of automation that we can look at is things like references. So on the external references, and I'm talking external to the data module, if you like, or the publication, is we can tag our common repositories. So we can have our warnings, our tools, our spares. And then the internal references, we could, for example, if we have references to other publications, they will become a PM reference. If we have references to other chapters or sections, they will become a data module reference. And then we can also pick out things like our internal figure and table and paragraph references to the items within the data module itself. So these can all be picked up electronically and tagged appropriately. Now, again, some of this we need that pre-work of defining what our data module requirements list is going to look like for our total publication, so that we have those references that when we pick up that, if there's a reference to another publication or another chapter, we can then convert that into the correct data module or publication module reference. Likewise, just jumping back up to the one before, the external references in the repositories, when we're scanning electronically, if we keep picking up the same parts, whether that's our tools or our spares or warnings, cautions, and so on, we can pull those out and we can actually build common repositories, and we can replace the actual plain text within the body with a reference to one of those repository items. The other sort of tagging that adds value is tagging for user features. And so indexing is a great one. Obviously, that's more applicable to PDF and print output when we're building a more traditional book or manual. But you've got to remember that your user, their prime aim of having this book is finding information. And so you've got to make it as easy as possible for them. And you've got to consider the ways that they're going to look up information. If they're using it in an IETP and it's all fully indexed and hyperlinked and they've got search engines and lookup tables, then that's great. We probably don't need an index at all. But if they're in just a simple PDF or even printed on paper, then the index becomes king for finding information. Everyone understands how an index works. You flip to the back of the book, you look through for the thing that you're searching for, and you see what page it's on, and you go to that page. And the other kind of user feature is looking up things. So again, whether this is kind of electronic or manual, those lists of acronyms, those lists of symbols, the bibliographies that appear maybe at the front or the back of the book, anything where the user might need additional information to help them understand the content. Again, we've done this where, for example, with acronyms, if you mouse over an acronym in a piece of text, then you can have the mouse tooltip pop up and actually tell you what the meaning of that acronym is. And that's a really easy one for a user to do. They haven't got to go off and look at the acronym list at the front of the book or in a different data module. On the flip side, again, if we're doing this for print or for PDF, we can have those acronyms pulled out of the content and automatically generate all of those lists for the user in the front matter of our publication. And it means that me as an author, I no longer have to maintain that acronym list and think, oh, hang on, I've added or removed an acronym from my publication. Have I updated the list at the front of the book? That all becomes a thing of the past. Again, obviously, these things cost time and therefore they cost money. And if we're doing them electronically, tagging acronyms. I did a project where there were hundreds, possibly even thousands of acronyms. And so we had a database with the list of all the potential acronyms. And as the tool went through and searched the text, it would find a potential match of an acronym in the database. The biggest problem is that the original material was so inconsistent, they would use the same acronym for, I think in the worst case, there was 6 potential different meanings for the same acronym. And so the way we built the tool in that instance was we actually had it pop up to the author, the editor that was running the conversion, and it would show them the context around where the acronym had been found and then show them a list of possible matches. So they could read the context, they could determine which was the correct match and then tag the correct acronym. Things that you need to consider, obviously, are we going to go to that length and that effort? It costs time, it costs money. But on the flip side, the users loved it as a feature. And it was one of the things in that particular project that helped it get a pass from the potential user community that this publication was fit for purpose. Right, final couple of bits, and then I'm going to show some stuff as well, because show and tell is always fun. Illustrations and media. So the biggest changing concept in S1000D is that these are separate assets. I've already talked about in our Word documents or in design, they tend to get embedded in the publication and that's it. They just are part of that publication for the rest of their life. In S1000D, they are held and managed as separate assets. They have their own life cycle. If you want to update them, they go through the same governance process for updating. So we need to work out how we are going to convert those. What is the source? Is the source of good enough quality? What are the available skills, time and budget if we want to actually rework some of those illustrations, or if we even have to rework some of those illustrations? And then finally, we need to understand what the process is. How do we identify them in the first place? Okay, it's quite simple to look through the book, but if we're talking hundreds of volumes with thousands of pages, how do we identify where all these graphics are? Can the electronic conversion do that for us? And if so, how is it going to do it? Is it going to pull them out of the page and save them as individual files? Is someone then going to have to go through and look at those files and decide whether they need reworking? So do we need to recreate them or even create them from scratch if they've been built? Like I said, in the InDesign project I talked about earlier, they were made from many composite parts. So they were going to have to actually create the illustrations in the first place. And then finally, how are we going to attach them or reattach them? If we're doing it electronically and if we're just using the ones that were in the original publication, it might be they were good. They were CGMs or SVGs already, in which case we just need to extract them and then make sure that we've reattached them in the correct place in the S1000D. Rename them as ICNs, because we, even if they had names in the underlying word processor document, they probably weren't named as ICNs. So what process are we going to come up for naming them, and how are we going to embed them back into our document? And then last thing, really, just a kind of a bit of food for thought for you before I go on and show a little bit of what we've been doing with some conversion stuff. Is conversion a one-way street? Yes. There you go. Simple answer. If you've gone for all that effort to get to S1000D, then if you were going to export the XML and edit it in something else and make it non-S1000D, well, then you've lost all that value. There would be absolutely 0 point having got to S1000D in then becoming non-S1000D, unless, I suppose, if you've done it for a very specific project and that project finished and you were never going to do it again, okay, maybe why stay in S1000D if all of your other data is in a different system. But in general, I would say yes, once you've gone there, stay there. However, there's also a no to this, because the beauty of our XML is that you can put it in any style sheet. So don't feel trapped in S1000D that it's always going to look like S1000D, because if your customer comes up and they have a different style sheet or a different requirement for their output, well, that's fine. It's XML. We can make it look and feel however we want, and you can produce whatever you want with that custom output. So, the point of getting to XML and the point of getting to a standards-based XML is that it makes your data much easier to manage. In S1000D's case, by modularizing it, we can reuse it. Our editing requirement or our maintenance requirement goes down because we only update the little bits that we have to at the time. And so don't panic that you're now trapped in S1000D, because style sheets are king for output. So how do we do it at Mecom? We have a engine that we call the XMLTriX engine. And this is a conversion engine that really we feed in some pre-formatted or pre-structured documentation, and then it will then convert it to whatever XML schema or output we want it to. In general, the way it works is we take in some kind of unformatted input. I've got PDF there. In fairness, we would actually probably turn the PDF into a Word document before we did this process. But we can take InDesign, we can take Word, and we run a pre-process. Having done that, it goes into the XMLTriX engine, and the XMLTriX engine has our content type, so that would have all our S1000D schemas in this case. We feed in metadata. Now, again, for S1000D, the metadata would be in the format of, for example, the DMRL. so that we know what our data module breakdown structure is going to be. And there's often a link between this pre-processing. We can export from the pre-processed Word document a list of all the main paragraph or section headings, so that we can then have that in a spreadsheet, and we can use that spreadsheet to build our data module requirements list in the first place. And we can go through and we can say, okay, yeah, this is this part of the SNS breakdown, and it's going to be this info code, because let's say it's a change procedure, so we know what the info code is for a change procedure. Again, notice this is electronic, but there is that manual piece of, I need to build the DMRL. I can't do S1000D without creating an SNS and a DMRL in the first place. So our content types, I say that's our schemas and all our entities and bits and pieces. And then we have a rule set. And the rule set, for example, part of this is just the underlying schema and structure rules of S1000D. Part of this might also include business rules if we have specific business rule requirements. And that might be things like, I could, for example, find a list, and I'll show you some of this in a minute, actually in some documents. But it might be that I have a list. Well, when I structure it, if I find a list item, I automatically wrap it in the list parent, and I automatically wrap that in a paragraph. But actually, my rule might be that if I've got consecutive list items, is that I wrap them all into the same list together, and so I make them siblings rather than independent list items. And what we do is we constantly try and improve the output by a feedback loop. So it might be that we find that we're mistagging something, or perhaps our figures are ending up inside our paragraphs and they shouldn't be for the particular version of S1000D. And so that feedback loop is constantly refining the engine process. So that gives us some output. And then from that output, we can then further process. So this is where we can look for reuse. So is my same figure reused time and time again? And we can do things, for example, like MD5 hashing a figure to see the actual file model. If that matches another figure hash somewhere else, we know that that's an exact match. We can reuse that figure. Same with common repositories. We can go in, we can look for things like our warnings and our tools and our spares, and we can pull them out and we can reinsert them by reference. And obviously, we don't want to just find the common repositories, but we want to actually look for the same consistency. So rather than having the same warning appearing as 10 different lines in a repository, we want to look for them and say, actually, yeah, we've already got that warning. And sometimes we have to do a bit of pattern matching, because maybe depending where it's displayed on the page, maybe sometimes it's just in a paragraph and you have the whole warning in one line. Well, if it's then in a table, in a narrow column, maybe it wraps over several lines, and maybe those line breaks cause the system to look at it as a different piece of text. So we then need to apply some rules to excluding white space and excluding line breaks to match whether it's the same warning as appeared somewhere else. Obviously, reporting is always good, because that will tell us, A, what's gone on, and B, whether there were any issues that need maybe a bit of further manual intervention. And we have this feedback loop. So whatever the source content is, we do a dump to a neutral HTML with, if you like, kind of zero formatting or minimal formatting. And then at the other end, on the output end, we can do a same neutral dump to HTML. And then you've got a really easy comparison check of saying, is my input HTML exactly the same as my output HTML? And there will often be minor issues, but at least somebody then can do that QA check and sit and look and understand what the issues are, and understand whether the issues affect the content, in which case they're a critical issue, they need addressing, or actually it's a non-content, it's just a structure or layout problem, and therefore we can pass it. And so that all helps towards our governance piece. The ultimate goal, of course, is that we end up with our S1000D, and I've obviously put our CSDB down there, but a lot of this is much easier if it's done in conjunction with a CSDB. Even little things like being able to preload the DMRL into the CSDB, and so having all of our data module stubs ready to go with all the right codification, with all the right ID and status information that we can load content into, and so on. So I can show a little bit of some of this. Now we have a expert who, I was going to say unfortunately, that's probably the wrong term, but from my point of view, unfortunately, he lives in New Zealand. And so for him, it's about 5 in the morning, I think, at the moment. So he's not online with us right now, strangely enough. But he's given me access to, so I don't have the full suite of tools on my system. And the way this runs at the moment, you know, this is not kind of a user, not user friendly is the wrong term, but this is not kind of a customer ready tool that we would just say to a customer, here you go, this is how it works, off you go and run it. Tony deals an awful lot with DITA, and he does some huge DITA conversion projects using this XMLTriX engine and the kind of processes that I'm talking about. He's not so familiar with S1000D, so I've asked him kind of for the purpose of today to do a bit of S1000D for me. He's put together just a kind of a basic representation of the kind of things that he can do. So I just need to change directory here, and I'm just going to copy and paste where I need to go to because it will make life easier. So we are in conversion. I'll leave this up here, then you can see what's going on. So I'm going to jump to there. Right. So at the moment, this is just running a little batch file from the command line. And basically, I'm going to run this batch file, which is going to use this Java. It's expecting to find my input document in here. And actually, what I'll do, have I cleared that out? Right, that was me playing early. So I'm just going to delete that for now. Oh, have I got it open? I've got it open somewhere. Let me close that. Try again. There we go. Right. So that's going to be my output folder. If I show you the input Word document to start with. So this is just a, you know, a light aircraft maintenance manual. We've just pulled out part of it for the process. And this is dealing with, you know, chapter 79. It's the oil system. And you can see we've got some descriptive text in here. We've obviously got a list there, and we've got some figures. Figures have got titles on them. And then we get past the figures. We've then got this troubleshooting table here with some columns and stuff in it. We've got some more descriptive here. We've got some warnings and cautions. And then we get into these remove install. So these in effect are procedures. And actually at the moment, these need a bit more work on them, but I'll show you that in a second. So we have a bunch of procedures for basically removing, installing different parts of the system. What I will show you on this Word document, if I bring up the styles, and if we go in the options and say, only show me the styles in use, and click OK. So these are the styles actually in use in the document. If I drop down that heading, so there's no heading 7, there's no data there. There's no heading 8, there's no heading 9. There's no list paragraphs, there's no table paragraphs, there's no talks. We do have some, oh, we should have some heading ones. Yeah, we have got some heading ones. So, I've got no heading 2. So basically, this document is pretty much unstyled. So if I select a bit of text, it's body text. If I select a list, it's body text. If I select some of the stuff in the table, it's a table paragraph. If I select this, it's just body text. So that is a heading 1. That is a heading 2. So I have got some heading 1s and 2s. My figure titles are just normal text. So, you know, it's not that this document has any special styles or formats already applied. This is just normal text. If I go up to here, this is just body text. So the beauty of Tony's tool is that when it processes the document, I'll just close it down so I can run the process. And we're just going to go step 1. So this is the initial process, and I've got a configuration file in here basically. So if I go back up to there, this little config file is basically telling it where to find the data, where to find the input, where to send the output, and so on. So if I run this step 1, so it's found the Word doc, converting to the XMLTriX internal format. It's then converted it from that internal XML back to a document for me in the first instance. And this is, if you like, is my first bit of manual intervention. So if we go and look now at that output, so that was the one I deleted a second ago. It's got the current timestamp, so there's no kind of trickery going on here. And you can see now that we've got this stuff in orange. And if I bring my styles back up, let's just go back to the in-use styles. So this orange stuff is S1000D unknown. It doesn't know what to do with it. And basically what I said to Tony is, right, well, all this stuff on the front page, this will become a part of the publication module information that will be printed on the front of the manual. So actually, we don't need to turn this into a data module. Yes, I'll need to manually pick it up at some point and put it into my publication module, but it doesn't need to go in a data module. So it's highlighted it in orange to give me a nice visual cue. To be honest, I can just pick all of that up and I can go S1000D ignore. So on the next stage of processing, it's fine. I don't need to do anything with that. Here, we've just been doing a little bit of work on this. So this would be my S1000D chapter number, and this would be my S1000D chapter title. And you can see in here already these red lines with the hashes or the pound symbols for you guys over in the US. It's picked up that there's some potential places here where data modules would start. Now, this general one, I probably don't want just a title in a data module and then another data module that has the bit of text in it. So I would go this one, actually S1000D ignore that. And so that now is my first data module. And then I've got another second data module here. This one's obviously a bit longer. For example, here it's picked up that this is a S1000D bulleted list. Obviously my text is picked up as an S1000D para. When we get down to the figures, it's picked up figure 1, that it's a figure title. It's figure 2, you know, and don't worry about the fact that the format's all messed up. You can see here again, we've got this S1000D ignore. What was in the page header and footer has all been automatically ignored. So that we've just got our stream of text. We've binned the intentionally left blank because the pagination is irrelevant at this point. So here I can go again, that oil systems I want as part of this. So I would do an S1000D ignore on that. And then I'm into this troubleshooting table, and you can see that my text has picked up as a table para, and so on. Now at the moment, oh, we've got another list there, yeah, so that's a bulleted list. Now at the moment, warnings and cautions was the other one. So the warning, it's picked up the fact that it says warning, and it's now labeled it as a warning paragraph, and it's picked up the caution as a caution paragraph. In effect, what we've just done in, you know, a few seconds running that Java is what some of the conversion tools out there would have you sit and do manually. They would have you sit with your Word document and meticulously go through to every paragraph, every line, every time there's a line break, and tell it some kind of S1000D mapped style. What we've done by running this in Java is we've just saved ourselves hours and hours of manual labor. And again, the potential for perhaps making some mistakes and missing and not tagging something that needs to be tagged. Now, obviously, this is just a kind of a scratch on the surface of the potential of this. One of the first things that we have to do is we have to analyze the document and decide what the styles are that we're going to use, where we're going to put these data module breaks, what things are going to be S1000D module titles, whether they're going to be, you know, top level para 1, or sorry, para 0s, whether they're going to be sub para 1, sub para 2s, or in the later version of S1000D, where those leveled paras are going to come and how they're going to nest and so on. So there's an awful lot that goes into building this pickup in the first place, but once it's built, and again, it comes back to that consistency piece. If your documents are relatively consistent, you can run this on document after document after document and get the same consistent output. Now, as I say, for us at the moment, we need to look at these because these are in here as tables, and we've not done, if you like, a next level of pass of saying, okay, actually, it looks like a table, but it's actually a procedure. So we need to pick these up and say that these are procedures because we're removing the filter and we're installing the filter. And these then need to get converted into a procedural data module rather than just a descriptive table. But it's, you know, a massive chunk of work that's pre-done for us. And things like picking up refer to chapter 711000, that we would look up in our DMRL, and that would be a data module reference. Likewise, refer to para 2b, well, that's within this. So at the moment, it's within this publication. That might still be a separate data module, depending where my breaks are, or if it's in this, what will become this final data module, then we need to turn it into an internal ref. And then here we've got one where we actually refer out to another publication. So again, if this is in my metadata spreadsheet, this could be a publication module for a different manual altogether. Beauty of that is that if we're then in an item and we're looking in this particular manual, I can actually look up that other manual in my item or my IETP. So that's the first stage conversion. As I say, I don't have the next stage conversion on my machine because Tony's been working on that for me. But in effect, the S1000D that we would get out of that is something like this. So we've got a list of data modules. We've got the information code. So that one there, for example, is the operation one. So it's picked up from the fact that we've got the title export was the operation one. We could then tag that. I'm just looking for the title. There it is, description and operation. So we've then been able to tag that and say from our DMRL, that's going to be an info code 130. And if I open that up with, say, FrameMaker, where is my FrameMaker? So it was the 130. There we go. So I haven't imported any of these into our CSDB yet, but you know that would be the next logical step, is to import them into the CSDB, and I can use the tools on the import to be checking the links. You know, are the references valid? Have I got correct references to other data modules, to the figures and ICNs and so on? I think this one has the figures embedded in it. Yeah, so there you go. So there's the figure that's been pulled out of the Word document. There's the title, the figure title that was pulled out of the Word document, and so on. Those two have obviously got a little bit of a background. That depends on the original graphics, so they would be potential candidates for rework. I think this third one, this was obviously a different format graphic in the original because this is coming as a really nice formatted, there's no background there on the illustration. Little things like the ICN numbers, again, are generated. In this case, we've used cage code based ICNs because then we can just use a running project number. So every illustration we find just increments the ICN number. If you wanted model ident based ICN numbers, then we'd have to do a bit more work to say that, okay, it was found in this part of the publication, it's going to end up in that data module, so we need to tag it with that data module SNS. And obviously things like the intentionally blank and the unclassified and what have you are all just generated by the FrameMaker application itself. But it gives you an idea of the content. There's, for example, one of my lists. So it's taken those list items, it's nested them in a random list in the paragraph. There might be contextually that actually that random list should even be in the paragraph above. And I've nudged that into the wrong place, but there we go. Let's nudge it. So that would be perhaps a better idea. So again, our feedback loop, we would pick up the fact that that random list would be part of its parent paragraph that's introduced it, and we would improve that tagging using the feedback loop and the feedback mechanism. So if I go back to my, as always, my final slide for you, if I can find PowerPoint, there we go. Let's minimize that, put PowerPoint back up. And we're right at the end, and we should be right at the other end now. And there we go. So it's about an hour. And again, you know, as all the other weeks, there's an awful lot that we've probably covered in just that last hour. The recording will come out on our YouTube channel as usual in the next couple of days, but more than happy if you'd like now for any questions. Brilliant. Well, if you think of any more questions, you know, drop myself or drop Suzanne an email. We'd be more than happy to try and expand or explain anything, jump on a call, whatever it needs. As I say, the video as the last three will come out shortly on the YouTube channel. I'll send out the links and so on as before. I'd love to hear your feedback, you know, particularly if you've been here for the whole series or for most of the series. Let me know what you think. It's the first time we've run a big series of seminars like this. I've done, you know, odd specific topics in the past. And likewise, moving forward, if there are topics that you would like to look at in the future, you know, understand how the business is going to react or work with something that changes in the future or something that you've been considering, give us a shout and we'd be happy to look at that kind of thing. At the end of the day, you know, from our perspective, yeah, we're here, we're a company, we're in business, but the more you understand about S1000D, the more likely you are to use it. The more you understand about our capabilities, the more that hopefully you're going to trust that we're the right partner for you to work on these kind of things. We've been around doing it for quite a few years now. I've been in S1000D for about 20 years, maybe, yeah, 20 years plus I've been in S1000D. So hopefully by now I know a thing or two about it, but anything we can do to help, as I say, questions, requirements, drop us an email, give us a call, and we'd love to help. Thank you very much. I will see you all soon.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you very much. Great series.
Thanks. Bye now.
Bye-bye.